Right. Good evening. Time for the bottom line tonight. And of course, it is with me, Kwesi Efri, and we are coming your way live from our studios here at Rage here in Accra. We are happy to be on your screens tonight as we discuss issues of economic interest here on the bottom line. We are live on DSTV channel 277, and we are live on our Facebook page, Chairman Kwesi Efri. You can put up your comments on our numbers that will be scrolling on the screen, and we try as much as possible to get the text messages read and to get our guests answer some of the questions that you will be able to put across. Tonight, we are focusing on the Ghana Statistical Service and the data that they release. We'll have a broad discussion on issues of inflation. We'll have a broad discussion on issues of data and statistics that come from the Ghana Statistical Service. However, we would have a critical look at some of the data that has been coming from Professor Steve Hank. We've had the Ghana Statistical Service replying on how they measure inflation rate here in Ghana with a CPI precisely, and how Professor Steve Hank uses the purchasing power parity. In a short while, if we have the graphics on purchasing power parity, we'll try as much as possible to get onto the screen and explain what it is when economists talk about purchasing power parity and how Steve Hank is using that as a measure of our inflation here in Ghana, and of course, how CPI is also used to measure inflation and how the Ghana Statistical Service is using the basket of the economy to do that measurement. So we have a number of items lined up tonight for you. You want to stay with us. When we come back, we'll get into the discussions right away. Stay with us. Well, you're welcome back from the break, and I am here in the studio, and my guest is already seated here in the studio as well. I'm happy to announce to you Mr. John Foster Agyaho, who is the head of Price Statistics Section at the Ghana Statistical Service. He's going to be our guest tonight, and we will take our time and listen to him. I'm sure reading the documents that I have, we will have the opportunity to learn. It will be an education for most of us who have been watching the news and been listening to the media on how our inflation targeting is and inflation rates are, and the data that has been supporting the inflation, which one is the actual truth. However, we'll play some of the bites that have come from specific sections of the economy and people who are also economists giving their version of how the data should actually look like. But of course, we have the Ghana Statistical Service here. Very non-political, but speaking to data and facts. Mr. John Foster Agyaho is my guest tonight. Good evening to you.
Good evening, my brother.
I hope you're doing very well.
I'm good.
And when the flyer was out, a lot of people thought that tonight is going to be a banter between you and Professor Steve Hank. You were expecting that as well?
Not really, because we felt we've responded to him, and we leave it to the good people of Ghana to judge.
So I've seen on a number of platforms people lambasting my good self for why we put the two of you together, Professor Steve Hank and the Ghana Statistical Service. But it's for the purposes of the good interest of our economy. And so we have some bites of some Ghanaians who have been talking about how the inflation rate is affecting them and how their pockets have been performing. We want to see that bite. We'll come back straight into our discussions for the night.
We are always running at a loss. Customers no longer buy our goods. We are pleading with government to reduce fuel prices.
First way, me 12 cedis a meje, bene 40 Ghana. First way, na 2 cedi, bene 5 cedi. Sisi angu ya ma 2 cedi. Na so obata yo true.
The prices of oil have gone up. We need government to intervene.
Abani ya ne eto ye. Angu ne ye wa ha. Anwa no so anwa whole food. Ebi wo doko ye anwa no so bi wa ha. Sisi anwa 5 million. eburo na ka ya bata aduane be na eburo ye ntumi nto
Be now. Like I first say, millet, 3 million. She be 7 million.
Millet, beans, etc. have all gone up while we're finding it difficult to get customers to buy them.
Traders have no option than to pass the cost on to consumers.
Transport fares need to be reduced, otherwise we'll keep passing the cost to the customers. The price of these goods last year was 500 cedis. Today, it's more than that.
10 million.
Right, so you saw some of the complaints from a section of Ghanaians on how the inflation rates are currently affecting them. Previously, we'll be talking about macroeconomic indicators, and some people will be talking about how we are not feeling it in our pockets. Now, I think, should we say it's now being felt in the pockets?
By and large, yes. I think every Ghanaian can relate to what is happening. And so, yes, it's being felt in their pocket, and they can relate to that.
But how do you feel? You sit at the Ghana Statistical Service, and you put out the figures, and usually lots of people, when it's being politicized, will come out and say, okay, these are the figures, but this is what we're actually feeling. But how do you feel when you put out the figures from your office, and now you see people really complaining that, yes, truly what you're saying is what we feel?
I was telling my boss, this is not a good time to be the head of price statistics section, because really, I mean, as you said, people really feel what is happening in there, and they use the figures that we turn out to justify why either they should get an increment in salary or what some services should be provided. But I think, by and large, we feel happy that people are using the data to inform decision making. That is our goal, and we're happy about
But that has been the case, and that should be the case for budgeting purposes, for policy decisions, and so on and so forth. But some of us have thought that they don't use the data.
So, I said we are happy now because we wanted to go beyond just the policymakers. We even want the ordinary man
To understand.
and use it in the day-to-day activities. And that, I think, now is gaining grounds, and we're happy.
Why do we have the current high inflation we have in the country?
I think that it's a multiple factors. One, domestic, and then we cannot run away from the global dynamics.
Let me, hold on there. My producer just put a graphic on the screen, and I'm going to put that out. This is how inflation has gone from January this year to September. Well, I don't know if this is month on month or year on year, but
This is a year-on-year.
This is a year-on-year inflation rate. So January, year-on-year inflation rates, this is a comparison between this year, January, and last year, January. That's correct, right?
Exactly.
So if we say that January was 13.9%, it means the calculation from January last year to January 2022, inflation has gone up by 13.9%. So February year-on-year was 15.7%. And I'm sure I'd allow you to take your time to explain what we mean by the year-on-year and the month-on-month, because I realize that a lot of people mistake the difference between January and February to mean that inflation has gone up from 13.9 to 15.7, when we should actually be calculating between last year and then this year. So when I finish announcing this, I'll come back to you to really explain that to us. In March, the year-on-year inflation was 19.4%. In April, it was 23.6%. May, year-on-year, that's as compared to last year, May, inflation was 27.6%. June is 29.8%. July, 31.7%. And then August, 33.9%. September. So I am actually going to check the figures for last year, and then we can do the actual comparison. But we are still too high, 37. You may want to take it from the year-on-year explanation and the month-on-month explanation. Then we come to why we are hitting 37.2 now.
Okay. So when we say year-on-year, Basically, all that we are doing is that we are looking at price changes a year ago. So, for example, you're talking about September. We look at how price changed in September 2021 compared to price changes in September 2022.
Right.
And the month on month basically look at how prices have moved between the previous month and the current month. So we are talking about September. We're looking at how prices have changed between August same year and September this same year. Yes.
Month on month is for the month, year on year
Yes.
is for the month. But my challenge is, however you look at it, 37.2 is very unpalatable. Why are we at this stage?
So-
and you started by talking
So I
about
started by saying that
global economic
there's
dynamics
a
and
mixture
the
of
local
events,
issues.
local event, global economy. You see, inflation affects factors and some have what we call lag. So, for example, we cannot say that the effect of COVID that attacked us in 2020 has passed away. We're still having that effect, hanging on. And then, as we were looking at the rates, you realize that February, March this year, things started getting out of hand, if I may use the word. And we don't know what was happening in the global dynamics, the war in Ukraine. And people say that Ukraine war is not only fought in Accra. Yes, it's true. But Ghana is more or less an import-dependent country. So the war is having effect of other countries where we go to pick our produce. Certainly, once the cost of production in those countries, we know what is happening in the US, we know what is happening in Britain and all the other countries. So this is where some will say we are importing inflation. So all these dynamics, and then we come to the local front, you look at transportation, which is affecting the production of food, cutting them to the market centers.
Right.
That's why I said mixture of effects, domestic and global.
But these are issues we can tackle, are they not?
To some extent, some know. I mean, the global one, you may have no control.
Global one, if we increase productivity, some economists have made the argument that if we move into a production economy and sustain it, we should be able to mitigate some of the challenges that come from the global economy.
I perfectly agree. But then, mind you, that will not be the immediate effect. That's a long-term plan.
But we are a country 60 years, or how many years are we? We have celebrated independence almost every year. At least for the fourth republic, are we saying that we couldn't have gone into a production economy until the time that if we have COVID, if we have a problem like the Russian-Ukraine war, we wouldn't be relying heavily. And the basket. I've seen the document. You have stated all the items in the basket and how you are differing Ghana's economy from the use of the purchasing power parity. Yes. And so we know the things that we need to embark on and be able to sustain our economy. From your point of view, should we stay up until this stage where we say we can't control?
No, I think no, you are right. And I must agree, I'm on you on the same score. And that's why probably we are particularly happy now when everybody is paying particular attention to data. We need to be looking at data before we plan. And so, yes, we may not have lost it all. Now we have the plan. Let's begin to put our plans together and make sure we move into production economy so that come next 2, 3, 4 years, we don't come back to the same problems again.
How are we going to bring the inflation figures down?
So it's you, me, the policymakers, and those who stay in the market. So the central bank, for example, is going to do all that they can do, and they're doing that using the policy rate.
Increasing the policy rate, 300 basis
to
points
make sure,
this year and there,
they stabilize it. And then the fiscal side, and as we talk about productivity, the good news for me, and I always keep praying that, we are in the harvest season. Probably, but for the harvest effect, maybe we would have been somewhere else. So our farmers should also be encouraged to keep on producing. And then we find a way of cutting the goods from the hinterland to the market centers at affordable price. I'm told government has started a very good program by providing free transport to cut goods from the market centers to the urban centers. All these, and then if you turn out a little bit on other increases in taxes or fuel prices, I'm sure we'll be out.
But those ones are really affecting us, the increases in fuel prices.
Unfortunately, yes, because once you increase petroleum products, transport first goes up, and then they have that rippling effect in transportation. And
exchange rate, for example.
Exchange rate. And we have about 60% of our commodities being imported. So if you're having problem at the forex side...
Which you calculate to be part of the basket, the imported goods.
Yeah, exactly.
They are part of the basket.
Exactly. They form more than 50% of our basket, yes.
Wow.
And so if there's problem there, then you can have realized that the market, the fruit will be affected.
So I want to move into Steve Hank's issues, but I've been talking about the basket. Someone sent a message earlier that when we say the basket, for the purposes of the lay people that are watching us, that we are mentioning, for example, 50%. What is a basket? What entails a basket?
So basically, we have over 1,001 items that we consume. And so in able to compute CPI and inflation, a study was done to select a sample of these items. So in that sample of items, which now we have 307, that 307 items that we compute inflation on is what we call the basket. So it's just a collection of items that we consume in our economy.
So the changes in prices of those items constitutes inflation?
So the CPI.
Constitute the CPI.
Yes, and then the change in the CPI is what gives us inflation. So there are two things. The CPI measures the average changes in prices over time. And then the inflation measures how
the CPI
is changing, how
over
frequently
time.
it is changing over time.
Let me come to your method of calculation, which you have stated, and Professor Steve Hanks. But first of all, let me ask you how that has hit you. You brought out a 3-page release, and did you have to reply? How has that hit you?
No,
as an institution?
We felt it's our responsibility. We produce inflation, CPI, and if somebody is also churning out data that's contrary to what we have, we owe it a duty to Ghanaians to let them understand what we do, and then they can feel comfortable. So that's why we brought the release.
Do you appreciate, you're mentioning the CPI, the fact that there are other measures of calculating inflation?
I'm not sure you're referring to this because I don't think this is.
No, I'm not going to settle.
No. I agree. What I mean is that I don't think this is a globally accepted way of calculating inflation. So if you read, and as we put it out in the report, you and I were taught in basic economics that there are basically 3 ways of computing indices. The Las-Perez, the Pache, the Fisher, we all know that. And globally, led by IMF, ILO, World Bank, have put up a manual, which we've all accepted globally, that we use in computing CPI. And at my last check, Steve Hank's PPP methodology is not part.
We'll come back to you to explain to us what the purchasing power parity is and why he's so confident about it. He is an accomplished professor of economics. And so we'll come back for the analysis, proper analysis of what Steve Hank has been saying and the quotations he's been given. 81% of inflation and so on and so forth.
Really?
Sitting outside the shores of Ghana, not knowing what's in the basket, but giving us the figures. When I come back from this break, we'll look at some of the comments, specific comments of Professor Steve Hank. We'll get the commentary from our guest, and then we'll now look at the details of the calculation of the CPI, or the differentiation between the Ghana Statistical Service and what Steve Hank has been saying. Here in the studio with my guest, who is taking us through inflation and how they come by it. And so I'll be announcing some of the figures to you very soon, but the current inflation rate is 37.2%. I'll be going into some of the sectors and some of the details. However, I have lots of messages coming up. I'll try and read just a few of them, and then we come back to the current inflation rate and the details of it, and we chip in Professor Steve Hank as well. Someone says, good evening. Thank you for today's discourse. Much interested. In fact, inflation in Ghana is very disheartening. We would be okay if it were only about imported goods, but the situation is not so. Everything produced in Ghana is expensive. There is no food shortage, yet we are hungry. Serious economic intervention is needed. Jude Focus in Takrade sent in that one. I'm sure you will note to give some comments on some of the messages that are coming. Walanyo in Akwetia says, the inflation keeps going up, which is not good indication for the consumers. And it will be better that the government will take strict action to arrest the tumble of the cedi depreciation. Regards to Robert Lamptey, CEO of Kumkom Foundation in Medina. Good evening. I want to know why was the policy rate increased, knowing well that inflation is largely cost push. My name is Elijah Fiebo from there in the Volta region. Well, so those are some of the comments. But let me just pick some of his comments from my producer, and I'll come back to you. From Professor Steve Hang early this year, some of the things that he's been stating on the figures of inflation and how he measures them. So this one was on the 10th of October, 2022. This is just this month. It says, Reuters reports that Ghana's inflation has hit 33.9% in August, the 21-year high. That's the official rate. It's wrong in caps. Today, I measure Ghana inflation at 89% per year. That's the year-on-year he's doing. Remember, by 95% rule, 95% of what you read in the press is either wrong or irrelevant. Well, that's according to Professor Steve Hank. That's according to him. This was on the 3rd day of October 2022, and he says, Ghana is in the 6th place in this week's inflation table. On September 29, I measured Ghana's inflation at a stunning 84% year-on-year, over 2 times the official inflation rate of 34% per year. Under President Akufo-Addo's reign, Ghana's economic problems just keep mounting. And he gives some of the data down there. But this is all based on the purchasing power parity and not what has been produced by the Ghana Statistical Service. You have your document here. I'll allow you to comment, and then I'll come back to your document.
So I should comment?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
No, I think that we should ask more questions. Mm-hmm. We all know that the Statistical Service goes to the market every month to collect prices on goods and services in our country. Mm-hmm. And I know a bit about purchasing power parity. In fact, I was reading some of his articles, and he tried to make the fact that his basket is even expanded than the basket that we use. I beg to differ. So, for example, the current, the purchasing power parity is done when countries do a global price collection on some common items.
For people that are watching us, somebody would ask, what's a purchasing power parity? I mean, the pricing of goods in other currencies. But for the layman, kindly explain to us, what's purchasing power
what
parity?
What it simply means is that they are comparing prices between countries in the US dollar. Mm-hmm. So if your rice is, let's say, $2 in Ghana, mm-hmm. is it $2 in Togo, mm-hmm. or is it cheaper in Togo? Mm-hmm. That's basically what they are doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, they normally, periodically, for the countries to collect data, they have a basket. The current one we're doing has a basket of 570 items. And you are supposed to price items that are on your domestic market. And you can't even price because you don't have all there. What we say is different from ours is that we have the
international basket.
That's international basket.
Which my maybe
your
grandmother
might not
in Mamponte Fadi in the Kwabre East district cannot buy or may not even know about.
I have Kobe in my basket, I have Kobe in my basket, I have Fufu in my basket. That this product will not be in the American
basket. It's not on the
basket.
international market.
So we have the local context. And again, we're saying that we place value on the importance the consumer attach to each item. And so we have what we call weights. So rice consumption may not be the same as maybe hairdressing. But his methodology assumes equal importance.
For each of them. So equal weights for each of them.
So a typical example, recently, when we're giving the items to show which items are having higher price change, there was this item called grapes, recording over 100% change. And people were like worried. And we said, no, don't worry. Even the weight of the grape in the basket is almost zero. So the grape can change like 200%, but it will not have significant effect on inflation, overall inflation. On the contrary, if you increase total fare by even 1%, it will push inflation out of GA. And the total fare is not in the purchasing power parity basket. So for me, I'm saying that let us ask him to produce his data. So it's not just a matter of saying purchasing power parity. Because we are part of ICP and we collect the data. We know the items there. He should just give us his items, and then we can interrogate that.
How regular is the basket reviewed? I mean, rebased.
Hours for the PPP.
Hours and then the PPP.
So we, every 5 years, rebase our baskets. The PPP doesn't rebase basket because they don't use weights. They come with a revised list of items for countries to go and collect prices on.
Right.
And look at something. They have specific item and specification. So they'll mention basmati rice. I wonder if my wife have ever bought basmati rice even to my house. And they'll give a specific, they'll say 5 kg pre-pack. So if you don't buy the pre-pack, and now people go to the market and they buy, 1 margarine cup of rice. So see, the local context that we bring to bear, based on international standard, best practice, makes it far different and superior to any other one that's been proposed around. And I really want to assure our people that, look, the data we produce is based on internationally accepted standards, and we open ourselves to best practices, transparency. Our data is online. You can go ahead and use your formula to replicate it. So if somebody was even using same international formula, probably on a different data set, and was having a different figure, probably after
Do we have the basket on your website?
Is there?
And can somebody get onto your website and use the basket to assess and do his own inflation calculation per the CPI?
Yes.
Is it possible that Steve Hank, well, he has stated that he's using the PPP?
If you go to our website, there's this we call COP analysis. The data is there. In fact, even now, and I was telling my boss, it's good we are doing this. We are creating another website where people can calculate their own personal inflation. So if you eat gobe, if you eat wache, you don't eat maybe fried rice and stuff like that, you'll be able to know how your inflation is changing and be able to determine what substitution you should make.
Somebody asked a question just now. The person says 37.2. I will come back to Steve Hank anyway. Should salaries go up? Per the data you have.
I would say we should be careful. Do you know why? The more we ask for salary increment, it will also have effect on inflation. So I think it's time for all of us to sacrifice and make sure we are out of the woods. Because you see, in the simplest of the same...
But if prices of goods and services are going up and your salary stays at one point, you can't pay for the goods and services, how do you help the inflation to come down? You need the purchasing power.
Which I agree, and that's why I was a bit careful. I said, yes, it's good to be giving some cushioning. And I think recently they gave, with the public workers, I think 15% or so.
Yes, that's the COLA.
The COLA. But if we're not careful and we keep pushing for more, chances are that more money will be chasing fewer groups, as we're taught in elementary economics. And then we'll come to square one. So the money that has been given to you will become virtually useless.
Now let me come to the 5 points that you raised in your statement, and I'll treat them one by one. I'll ask you to treat them one by one. I'll come to a few questions from my guests, then we can round up. This one says, importance of the items. Okay, so let me start from points of departure between the CPI and the Steve Hank PPP approaches. I think PPP is a universal, not belonging to him, but
it's a universal.
He says it is his approach. But we should make that clear that purchasing power parity is a system used by economics.
In fact, and I've even said that we even contribute to the data that is used in calculating the PPP.
PPP. So I mean, it's a system used by
unless of course
every economist.
His personal PPP, which is different from the global one.
So now you go on to say globally measures of CPI and inflation are based on the Consumer Price Index Manual, concepts and methods, and should satisfy the following conditions. 1, importance of items. The GSS approach, which utilizes weights, that was what you were explaining, ensures that the items which make up larger share of household consumption expenditures exert larger influence on the CPI relative to those that have smaller shares. The SHS PPP approach does not collect data on prices, only uses exchange rates and does not take expenditure weights into account. You have explained that already, so I'm able to go on.
Okay.
Point number 2, disaggregation. You say the GSS releases monthly inflation figures at the regional level and provides disaggregated rates of food and non-food inflation and for imported and locally produced items. The SHS PPP approach is not able to disaggregate data, particularly at the geographic level, and it does not involve data collection from the market.
Yes. So you see, the data you just showed, it's just giving overall figure, maybe 70 point something. But then because we collect prices from the markets, the regions, before we do the computation, we are able to disaggregate and say that inflation in Eastern region is this, inflation in Greater Accra is this. This is how much Upper East is contributing to the overall inflation. And these are the items that are pushing this region's inflation. That is good for policy targeting. And so, I mean, he's giving general overview. How useful would that be for policy targeting?
Exhaustiveness. All the important items that are consumed in Ghana are in the basket that GSS uses to compute CPI.
Yes.
You have all of them?
Yes, because you see, we came out with the basket from a living standard survey.
That's the Ghana Living Standard
Ghana Living Standard Survey.
GLSS.
And that tells what Ghanaians consume more. It's different from a basket that has been brought for someone say, look at it, if it's available at your market, price it. So we started from the side of the consumers to say these are the items we consume based on the relative share of expenditure. And that's
expenditure of consumers? Or
yes,
who?
expenditure of consumers on those items, individual items.
So you have statistics to show that the expenditure of consumers on those
even
items...
on our website, everybody can go for it right now as I'm speaking. Our GSS data is there.
But it is not everything that's in the basket.
No, so that's why we're saying that the people have placed relative importance
On these items that are within the basket.
And that's what we put in the basket.
Finally, contextualization. You say the GSS approach produces statistics that consider country-specific living arrangements. For instance, it accounts for price quantity adjustments when the use of weighing scales is not predominantly used in the determination of prices, and other modes such as olunka and baskets are more common.
So you see, if you're just looking at movement of exchange rate and you're using that to measure inflation, we go to the market. Look, as we speak, we've identified over 20 items whose prices between the last month and this month have gone down. Even though exchange rate is going up, how will he explain that? So we go to the markets every day with our scales. We take what you have put up there to sell, and we measure the relative weight of it and the price. Those are the things that feed into the computation that we do. We don't just come with the price and say, okay, rice is this is it. How? You know, people do make this example that kenke, at times the price may be the same, but...
That's the politicization of it. People will pick up kenke balls and then say,
so we go
it
with
was
the
2
weight.
cedis, now it is 10 cedis.
We don't just take the price. If it's bread, we take the price, we take the weight to see how indeed it is affecting. So like I said, you could see inflation, exchange rate going up. I mean, it's going up. But if you go to some of the rural markets, you have some items, yam, gari, millet, the prices are coming down. Plantain, they're coming down. So they are at variance with exchange rate. And that's why we're saying that if you're using exchange rate to equate
Measure
inflation in Ghanaian context,
You're
really,
wrong.
no. It's not feasible.
But there are other indicators, other macroeconomic indicators that if you use them to measure inflation rates, are you still wrong? Exchange rates is one that we are talking about.
No, you see, in Ghana, with the experience I have,
Yes.
if you just exchange rate to measure inflation, I'm not saying they don't affect. But it's not valuable in our basket anyway. But it affects prices of other commodities. And that's why I've just given an example where exchange rate is going up. Yes, still we have some items that we produce locally, the farm produce, whose prices are going down.
But exchange rate rather affects all the other indicators. It affects unemployment.
Oh, certainly.
So currently, do we have unemployment is going up? That's 7.2?
In fact, the last one, we don't produce unemployment rate monthly.
Every year, of
we
course.
are not
I
ready
agree.
to do that.
Yes.
We are striving to do that, but we leave it quarterly and annual. Of course, it's going
I was trying to run away from that question of employment. But please go on.
Of course, I mean, as you rightly said, there's a trade-off. And so policymakers are looking at it and they will see which one. Look, let's all admit, yes, the 37.2 is not easy, but I don't think what I'm hearing from other sources, we are anywhere hyperinflation, and I'm still buying my kenke.
We are not there yet. Is that what you're saying?
Certainly not close.
We are not
If you're talking
running, we are not galloping, we are
hyperinflation-
not hyper.
Then, by the time you leave here to your house, you'll not be able to buy the bread that you bought in the morning. But at least we can have the price of this bottle of water can stay at least for the next 2 or 3 months, same price. So we are not close to, unless of course there's any other data that can point to me from what I see.
Somebody says, I understand what the GSS director is saying about the inflation, but the reality is different. We are feeling the exorbitant price of goods and services. Can you imagine a bottle of red palm oil which was sold at 15 cedis in January is currently 40 cedis he was just explaining that now, but I'll still give the question back to him. What was the percentage increase? Over 166%. We, the ordinary Ghanaians, do not need the overall average price of goods. We are interested in the real price, which is beyond our financial abilities.
So I think let me take this opportunity to make some clarity. So at times people get confused with the inflation and the actual price. Nobody's saying that prices are very affordable in the market. But what we try to point out is that the rate at which these prices have gone up is by this rate. And so if you say inflation is about 37.2%, all that we're trying to say is that there has been that change about 37.2% between last year, September, and this year, September, in the general price level of goods. We're not saying the prices are down, but the rate at which they are increasing.
Samuel T. Michael from Sekendi Takrade says, concerning the inflation discussion, please, you said salary increase will affect the economy. Please, can you explain better?
Let me begin by saying that I'm also a public servant, so
Yes.
I'll be happy
So
if
you
my
want
salary...
your salary to be
Exactly. But I'm also being
But from the economic
patriotic
point of view, yeah.
that it is good. But you see, the problem is simple. Basic economics says that when you have more money chasing fewer goods, the prices will go up. So if we have not tackled production side, where we're going to have enough supply, and we're just calling for increases in salary, where more money will be brought to the economy, then I'm afraid it could have adverse effect sooner than later on inflation.
The inflation issue is influenced by external factors, but the only internal measure to curb the inflation is to make the hoarding of the dollar by individuals irrelevant.
That is even more dangerous. Because we are complaining about exchange rate. In fact, that's what somebody is even using.
Right.
And you want us to hold it for the price to go up more. You and I will be in the country. We live to see. So that, we should not even encourage that at all.
In fact, the cities to see safer today was really, really alarming. Imagine 5250.00 CFA is now 100 cities instead of 15,000 safer in few years ago. My name is Sataru from Widana Upper East Region. Real market rate of inflation is the rate of depreciation of cedi against the dollar. From January to now, the cedi has depreciated by 75%. The current rate of inflation is 75%, not 37%, as you are suggesting. Francis Intakrade said that. I think you want to speak to that, but he's given the basis for explanation or basis for the CPI and the inflation rates and so on and so forth.
Just a small one that, you see, where Francis got it wrong is that exchange rate does not affect every single commodity in the basket. So yes, it might have depreciated by 70%. Remember the other items, the one we produce, if he has taken his time to look at the Ghanaian consumption pattern, we place more emphasis on food items. They have more weight. So if the banche, if the yam, if the plantain are in abundance, if the tomato is coming, and they are having a stable price or even reduction in price, then they will end up pulling the inflation down. Even though exchange rate may be going up, but the oversupply of this item will end up pulling back the inflation. So we may have a commensurate rise in inflation as you see in the exchange rate.
Somebody said that some of the increase in prices are artificial. You look at what's happening in other prices, like fuel, like transportation, and you go to the market, they increase their prices anyhow. Those who are not transporting, those who are not using electricity, those who are not using the items that should cause the price of the good to go up are still increasing their prices.
My brother, if I should be very frank with you, I think Ghanaians are not helping the situation. In fact, we look at the data, and my boss even did that in his inaugural lecture. One commodity, you could have about 3 stores selling at different prices. I'll give you a practical example. I think some 2-3 years back, we were doing a workshop at Adenta, and I wanted to buy this bottle in Tampico, the bottle one. I went to the first shop, and they said it was 5 cedis. I knew I was buying that 2 cedis, 50 pesos.
Yes.
Thank God, I looked at the expiry date, it was expired. I moved to the next shop, which was less than 1 minute walk, and the woman sold it to me for 2 cedis, 50 pesos.
And people from 5 cities to 2
Yes.
cities.
So people are really taking advantage of the situation. And as rightly said, I fought with somebody who was selling a cantier. And when I asked why this exorbitant price up,
You are going to the bush. You are using cutlass. You are just
you're not feeding the gas cutter. He said, but are you not aware that things are hard?
And so the price of the grass cutter should
That's
go up.
up.
Mr. John Foster Agyaho is the head of price statistics at the Ghana Statistical Service. I'm sure you've been educated enough. When you see Professor Steve Hank's figures, you may want to go to the Ghana Statistics website to also check what's actually there. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're happy we had you, and I'm sure we'll keep coming back to you when we don't understand anything or when new figures come up.
My pleasure. And
My name is Kwesi Afriyie, and it's been a pleasure hosting the show tonight. Thank you very much for sending in your messages. We'll meet here next week for God and Country. Good evening.